Oh, good morning, everybody. Glad to have you here. Again, if you will, like, share, or comment on the post, and then join me in the 26th chapter of the book of Acts as we continue with Paul before Agrippa and Bernice. As he is talking, he said Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. What an odd statement. You're so smart, you're crazy. But Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I'm speaking true and rational words. For the king, speaking of Agrippa, knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. In other words, Agrippa, you know what's going on. Do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time would you persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. Then the king arose, and the governor and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them, and when they had withdrawn, they said one to another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. So we are coming to a turning point again in Paul's life, in his journey, in his trial, and Paul is now addressing Festus and Agrippa, and he is speaking to them. And finally, Paul has told him about having a vision, seeing lights, and finally, Festus just that's all. He thinks Paul's gone crazy. You've studied so much, you're so smart, you've lost your mind. But Paul doesn't slow down, doesn't miss a beat, and continues. I started to say on the attack, but that's on the offensive. That would be a better way of saying it. Paul wasn't actually attacking anybody. He was just taking the offense here and telling people his story and what had happened to him and what had went on. And so Paul says, Festus says, you've gone crazy. You're not making good choices. But Festus again continues. Paul continues to then defend himself, and since he knows how Festus feels, Festus thinks Paul's crazy. He turns and starts addressing Agrippa and talking directly to him about this situation, because he knows it says that none of this has escaped the notice of Agrippa. As I read that, I've been trying to figure: is he saying he hasn't slept through these events of what's going on, or that Agrippa outside of this courtroom knows what's been going on with Jesus? I tend to think it's that one, that Agrippa, you came in here already knowing what had went on with Jesus and the stories that have been told. You've heard about his walk, his life, his ministry. You've heard about his crucifixion. You're in the Roman government. You know what has been going on. You have heard these stories, and you just ask him again. Agrippa has a Jewish background. You've heard of the prophets. Do you believe what they had to say? They predicted these things would happen. And so Agrippa asked him, says, "Are you trying to convert me here? In 2 minutes of talking and just this little bit of time of speech?" And Paul basically said, absolutely. And everybody else, if they'll do it, if they'll listen, everybody in this room, I hope they hear the good news of Jesus and convert and begin to be followers of Jesus Christ. And so Paul's willing here to talk to any of them. He said, if any of you want to know more about Jesus, come to my jail cell. I'd be glad to talk to you. Once again, Paul being a magnificent model for us. And at that point, we see that Agrippa and Festus and Bernice, they all go outside. And as they get to decide, you can almost picture this conversation. You can almost hear it in your head. What do you think? You think he's crazy? What do you think's going on here? What's he up to? And Agrippa quickly gives him his conclusion. He says, this man hadn't done anything. So I'm not saying he hadn't done anything wrong, but I'm saying he hasn't done anything that deserves being executed for. He hasn't broken any Roman law that would lead to his death. In fact, he hadn't even done enough. He's not even guilty enough to hold him. He could go free had he not appealed to Caesar. And so Paul is going to be forwarded on to see Caesar. Once you made that appeal that you wanted to have your case heard by Caesar, that had to happen. You know they couldn't change their mind then. He couldn't even change his mind. It had to go to Caesar. And so Paul has now stood here boldly proclaiming to Agrippa, Festus, Bernice, and everybody in the audience their need for Christ, and no threat, no danger was going to change him up to the point of he's now going to be shipped off, taken to stand trial and to tell his story again to the most strong, the largest, the most powerful authority in the land, and that would be Caesar. And again, we see from Paul, once again, this marvelous model that he doesn't allow authority or fame or fortune or power or his own well-being. He's put himself in some fairly dangerous situations here in this story, but it has not stopped him from proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. And you know, a question that I ask a lot of times in preaching, a question I ask myself even, is what would it take to get you to not tell somebody about Christ? What would it take to get you to be silent about the good news of Jesus Christ? I'm certain some of you have heard me tell this story before about being in China and coming down the elevator with this well-dressed young man, and having heard a lot of stories before we got there about what has happened to some Christians in China. We come down the elevator and the man's looking at me up, and finally we get down to our landing point, and he looks at me and he says, "You're American." Well, I couldn't hardly deny that, no more than he could deny being Chinese. And I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you a Christian?" And I'm not sure how many answers ran through my head in a matter of seconds of things I could choose to say. Don't understand you. No, you know, all kinds of answers ran through my head for a split second. You know, again, I'd heard some of the things that had happened to Christians in China, and so I had to decide in a moment. I'm definitely not bragging on myself in any way. I've told you there were all kinds of answers running through my head, and I opened my mouth, and thankfully the right one fell out, and I said yes. And again, thankfully, this young man stuck out his hand. "Glad to meet you. I got saved at the Billy Graham Center in North Carolina." Well, man, I'm from North Carolina, and so it was really a cool conversation. But for a moment, it had me panicked. What would it take to get to church? What will it take to get Christians to be quiet? Maybe a better question in our world today is, what's it going to take to get the church to step up? We've already been quiet. What's it going to take to get the church to step up and proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ? You have a good day. We'll see you here tomorrow morning.